Darabaların, men adım Alexandra, Ivanova, töngülükten türüttəxbin. Bilgin London koraqqa olurubun. Londonga köspütüm ıratta 16 yıl, 15-16 yıl bolla. Ülevinen köhöt bittire. Atak Amerikaga 12 yıl olurun üniversiteteka öğrenmedeyim. Onunla ülağa kiren baran ol ülevinen Londonga yıktıra. Bilgin bollağına bu tuğ komandirovkaga Atlanta'ga çabuk ülevinen emiye. Olca üleler bittirildi ver. Rahat etti. 16 hatta yıl bolla. Rahatta ülelerdim. Urukku kollegalar buneyin görse. London tagar olurum. İki olaqpın. Oğlaq kız. Ol 13 sastaq, aysen janataq. Kız 11'in hötürü toluqtaq. Kene aynı janataq. Kergenim İspanyet'ten hıcar. Galicia, Severnej. Qotugu İspanyet'ten. Aynı janat bollağına Jiginen de tuğ İrlandskay at keltir bulağına İspanya, xotu İspanyanlıkları hevestaqtır, kulturalara mıygın har bağayı. Ol at, kız atı, ol aynı atı, xılbıra keltirten İrlandiyattan kelbitin, ol İspanskay manieraga aynı denin atılır. Atak Onya İrlandskaydı. Onu men ayına jenge maygınatan, onu saxalıga men maygınlar men ömühəbləvdim. Xorxalın bullağına bir göleli hiçcanım təvətəvdir. Köşsübüt. Cevit London tahgar var. İnvestisiyadan jarıptanım. Rukkattan öğreniyək bitti, üniversiteka öğreniyək bittenler. Portfeline investisiyadan jarıptanıq fın bağır eretim. Ol tuğunun urkattan tol Amerika öğrene baran finansiyen spesialine het albudım. Onu naha hübüləbidim. Nar finansı ve investisyonu ötüdür. Üleliyik ben bağır eretim. Onu hintun. Mannaygı üniversitet kanetten bulbut ülem municipalnay obligasyonun toxtur. Investirudur teriltağı. Место vardı, onu tiyen 5 yıl ülelebidim. Onu lelihiccan Kadirovanyağa öğrenmedim. Tığınca 6 yıl laqatı. Ol IT отделыгар ülelebidim. Ol lelihir taqbına olğan toq. Olar iyi bolbuda teriltebeti heger eder ülehittir. Nadalar denir onu toq. Позиция арибитра без местини. Onu заявление берем баран. Ами интервьюнин, собеседованиянин багытын бар бит. Onu бехе болан тагылабыт бит. IT отделгар 6 ай үлеләбитим. Онна разы көһөн калбытым ол саңа местеге. Лондонга көһөн баран кергенмен онда көрсүбүтүм бир көлеләбит бит битирилтаа. Кене атына делete oğullar ulap törəvitlərin inkənetdən hangatan öyle gördüğün adın xenli koraqqa var addelga köspütüm. Xobara toxçanı itallar horor. Ben eder hicjargar tox sübebirini de bəğər den bədir hübbə hılanırat tügür. Tutsılanırat tügür. Onu bilgin hanan körübün бәйәгә итәгәйи бәян сынагын билини ден әтәлләр әтәттен мен әдәр тахпына. Оны олорон өйбер санавар кирер гына токуйдавата хәбеппин. Билеген буллана кыҗык онны кебет оны бәян олорон үлән биләгән. Олehen әдәр чакка мен немен дибен. Олар әрі әдір үтчат бәлерін әме олықтырын оларын ұрақыттары көрсен үйерінен үрдіқтерін нады. Ол әме олық көрді болар болаға де. Отын барыта ән іскер бар. Бәйін бәғір етіға еқін нады. Етіға едіқіна мен хөпкі гынабын, мен ханырым, мен оңырырым, мен тахарым барыта мені. Атын жоннор кене болбатақ. Атын жонтын үйерен, атын жону көр. Оларын, атын жону барытын кенелері копиялыр күрдік оңырыма бәйін оңырыргынан, бәйін саныргынан еніндегі баран есіз кеттен хем бір тақсыр ол. Баға бар боллағына төхінен күске ол баған тұхығар үлелер боллақына еніндегі баран еған. Өрхаттар, көшсөқтірі, өрхаттар олық частыры, олыққа хем бір бар. Ол әйеға хем бір күз берер. Тоқары төттөрү тарды болар, тоққара түгінері табылы бад, қайыр өліға барықын бағараған әйеға бер бәттер, атын кейіні әнін нүгір өйә тахаралар, өліғар түгірі төхі білә бәккенді. Оны кәмнерге тоқтабаққа, нәлиян олырын қалбаққа, оны чәмені анан бүтер дебәкке, бәғын илигер ылынан туран тәбәнән бараңын эннен дикеме баран яғын. Тоғы жетаққа ол әйеға үйерақ болар, әйеға опыт болар. Онтықағаттан үйерінен эннен дике баран яғын онына өйін санаан үрдүр, кәңір, білейін әме үрдән ехер. Onu barıtın bəğər ılından yaxınladı. Onu bəğə itağa yaxınladı. Bir saxalarga mə var bandık. İsi hispetitten küstəx sana onu bəğə sana var. Onu bu anıgı olaqqa min hanıq var çarahan qalbıt kurduk. Dönür ühə nutçılı taqa поверхностно. Онуманык баннык көддөрөллөр, үләгә, үрәккә, сыһаннарыннык болан халар. Жеңенен эсеһиттен Аллаһка бияха испитигер күстәх турук бар, ол турук боллагына ахыллан береннады, оны итага якыннады. Оны тагайдахына эйген кимде көйен тохтоппот. Оны мен ханыр бынан bu kolabora bu arxalıq olur jonnor saydılaq şoddur denattı bitçi. Deginen kinler esisteriger manlık küs sana öttütünden duhufnay sana öttütünden bihin nağar çarastır. Bihi küs büt naha dirin ayılxağa sığımıt çugas antukağıdın hüderbekke etağalgitin jahır taqıdına küs köme olur. Bağır eskitten var, eskitten taqsırın tukar. Kimde yaha tahtta sütütten berbet.
Alexandra, Ivanova, fixed income fund manager at Invesco. Alexandra, thanks so much for some adjustments around the forecast and the dot plots later today from the Fed. What is your expectations? Do they dial back from 4 to 3 or go even further?
Well, our view is that they probably will dial back. I think 3 makes sense. If they do 2, I think the market is not going to like it. It's probably going to be too hawkish in terms of messaging. But given that Fed has a tendency to surprise us in December, like last year we had a big pivot to being bullish, I wouldn't discount that they might not do it. But my expectation is that they will review and recalibrate their final dot, and also I think taking out a few cuts from the dot plots for next year. Just one maybe makes a lot of sense to me.
Price coming out with a view yesterday that yields on the 10-year could hit 6%, on some fiscal challenges in the US. Does that seem do we need to brace for a bigger sell-off in this bond market?
I personally don't think so. It is quite outrageous and a big forecast, of course, and it's a headline grabbing. But I don't think that we will get there. And if we do, we will be looking at a very different environment for investors, and risk market is definitely not going to like it. And in that environment, I would think that the Fed will have to cut even more than we are expecting. So I think gradual increase in rates is probably bearable for equity markets, but anything that comes up very quickly, if the rates react quite aggressively, that is also a risk for equity and credit markets.
OK, Alexandra Ivanova, thank you very much indeed. Fixed income fund manager at Invesco, on the case for European credit and the need to do your homework, bottom-up research when it comes to the UK market, where there are still opportunities and rates. I'm very pleased to say I can bring in Alexandra Ivanova, fund manager at Invesco. Alexandra, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Morning.
Let's start with the story. It's a big week in terms of the data coming out of the US. So we had the manufacturing gauge coming in softer out of the US. We've got jobs data, JOLTS, so the job openings, and then non-farm payrolls on Friday. Are we starting to see a turn in terms of the data in the US? Should we start to brace for a softer US economy, or is that relative stability still there?
Well, I do think that given all the uncertainty, I wouldn't be surprised that the data might start surprising to the downside. But so far, it has been quite resilient. The labor market has been surprisingly strong. And our expectation is that we might see the payrolls to come down, a step down a little bit from the last 3 months, but it still shows some resilience in the U.S. economy. Both.
A bit of both. OK.
Yeah.
Alexandra, thank you very much indeed. On the credit markets, rates, and of course equities as well. Fund manager at Invesco with a view on these markets. Now, some other stories making the news this Tuesday.
The wider bond market is Alexandra Ivanova, fund manager for the IFI Europe team over at Invesco. Lovely to have you this Friday morning. Let's start with tech then, because we are constantly talking about fears about AI capex. We've had this 100-year note coming from Alpha this week. As tech makes up more of the high-grade issuance coming out of the US, at what point do you get worried about concentration risk?
Well, it is a good question, because this 100-year bond in UK sterling market has been one of the biggest in history.
Yeah.
But given the appetite and investors' readiness and waiting for this kind of issuance, the demand has been so strong, which surprised even ourselves. And we've seen books covered almost 10 times on that 100-year bond. And on the break, the bond has traded okay. I did not expect that it's going to rally that quickly. But at the same time, I would say that the amount of supply that's coming into the investment opportunities where the gilts have actually rallied into year-end, and they outperformed. So that was a good opportunity to rotate out of it. And once we sell off, I think, at some point, good levels to get back in. OK.
Alexandra, great to see you. Thanks for coming in on a Friday morning. That's Alexandra Ivanova, fund manager for the IFI Europe.
I'm waiting for the Liberation Day tomorrow. But I do think that it's a place where you have to be quite diversified, because you were talking about the European equity markets have outperformed first time since the global financial crisis. And if you are a global investor, which you are in luck, you can reallocate between different regions. For me personally, we have been quite more heavily involved with the European equities and less of a US to start with. So the starting point actually matters. And for the longest time, as we were saying, it's easier to invest in US. It was a no-brainer, US exceptionalism, and the money flows there. So that has been a really, really big headwind for our performance. So we mostly focus on the bottom-up and alpha generation. Now it feels like at least it's balanced, and within that you can play different themes, different sectors, different individual names. Because these are strong companies, strong balance sheets, they generate revenue, they're very profitable, and they don't have debt. And if we are thinking about that the risk of recession is coming up, you want to look at the companies that are going through this recession and come out on the other side.
Now is Alexandra Ivanova, fixed income fund manager at Invesco, with a particular lens, of course, on the credit space. But Alexandra, let's get your focus first, or your views first, on the Fed. Markets increasingly betting that December is a done deal, December the 10th, in terms of the next rate cut. Is that where you see the action, or is this a question of looking out into 2026 and how the Fed adjusts, potentially with a more dovish structure?
Yeah, it is a good question, because I do think December is a done deal, because we don't have a lot of data coming out between now and the Fed meeting. Most of the data will come after the meeting in terms of payrolls and inflation. For me, what's more important is what's going to happen in 2026 and whether we will get to the 3% rate that market is pricing. Given where we are in terms of the economic cycle, I do think that there is a risk that we might actually see a bit of pickup or cyclical pickup in growth. Given we have fiscal expansion, Fed is cutting, some regulatory relief is also coming. So you could argue, if the growth side stays robust, we might see a little bit less of a cutting in 2026. But December is a done deal, I think.
December's a done deal, but you're suggesting that potentially markets are pricing a little bit too much easing for 2026, despite changes at the top of the Fed that we're still waiting to get details on. Markets pricing in, to your point, rates getting to about 3% in October of next year, and you think that's overdone?
I think at these levels, I think in terms of rates, we are very fairly priced, and the risk reward is probably slightly to the upside. So DMO is also saying we're not going to issue a lot in the long end. So that's helping the long end. So I'm actually worried about the belly of the curve, how we call it. So 10-year part of the curve might actually struggle, and that's where you can think about yield curve steepening to stands
as well. Yeah, really interesting. Alexandra, thank you very much indeed. US steepeners in favour. Maybe the front end to the gilt market has some way to go as well in terms of an opportunity, getting exposure and views as well on consumer and gaming names, and maybe some alpha that comes through in high yield credit within that space next year. Alexandra Ivanova, fixed income fund manager at Invesco.
Hello everybody, I'm delighted to have with me today Alex Ivanova, the portfolio manager. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
What do you think the key macro themes that you are dealing with this year are?
Mostly we are looking and watching how inflation dynamic is going to develop, both in developed world and emerging markets, and how that will impact into the growth going forward in 2025 into 26, and that will dictate how central banks will react in terms of their monetary policy stance. Secondly, we are looking and watching how US administration is going to implement policies that will have impact on both growth and inflation, and how the retaliatory or some responses that will be coming from other parts of the world is also going to impact our markets and inflation in general.
Asset allocation is obviously a key part of what you do. What are your thoughts on bonds versus equities at the moment?
We have been quite balanced in our allocation between bonds and equities. Given that we have much higher yields historically, it makes a lot of sense to lock in some of this yield within our portfolios. But at the same time, growth has been robust, and we are seeing some easing of monetary policy, rates coming down, inflation potentially coming down and stabilizing, if going down even further. It is a good environment for broadening of the equity market growth going into 2025. However, given the risks of different policies, given the risk that we have a lot of uncertainty how we are going to react to all these policies. It's not an environment where we want to be overweight equities. So I would say, I generalize, we are neutral in equities and slightly overweight credit.